have a great idea for a story, but need help building it into a cohesive narrative. You have an awesome character in mind, but want inspiration for their journey. Oh, you have a shocking twist that will slide audiences out of their socks, but lack the steps to get to it. Yes, these are all daunting issues that every writer faces early on in their story development. But one of the best ways to punch out a plotline purgatory is to turn to the recipes that have been used by countless successful writers for decades. It's time we embrace story structure. There are a number of reasons why so many writers have turned to story structure models while outlining their narratives. It makes your protagonist's arc more coherent, it marries the plot and the character's journey in a satisfying way, and it pushes the writer to justify the purpose of each scene, which does lead to a stronger, more enjoyable experience for the audience. Story structure shapes narratives into having a clear beginning, middle, and end, as well as carrying audiences through a plot that introduces the setting, events, characters, conflict, and themes. Now, there are some writers who may fear that story structure will take the edge off their unique, original idea. But you shouldn't really worry about that too much. There are some incredible twists, turns, and trapdoors that can still be achieved while also playing within the boundaries of popular narrative models. This is what the audiences expect, and this is what the producers are looking for. So even if you don't want to embrace it, you damn sure better understand it. And as you'll see across these 10 story structure models, most stories follow the same pattern anyway. So let's dive right in. But before we begin, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss out on another episode. What all narrative structures have in common. If you put your favorite stories under a magnifying glass, you're going to quickly see a consistent pattern form. The status quo. It starts with a character living in their ordinary world. They may not be happy per se, but this is life as they know it. The inciting incident. Something happens. A sudden moment has pushed the character onto a journey that will kick off the rest of their story. Rising action. The character encounters challenges and obstacles as they charge towards their objective. All is lost. In order for their character to truly succeed, they must lose, and lose big. The deeper the fall, the more rewarding the return. The final test. Taking all that they've learned and experienced along the way, it's time to put it to the test with the biggest challenge to date. And resolution. You can't have a joke without a punchline. And a story's punchline is the resolution. Did the character attain their goal? Did they fail? Or did their quest lead them to achieve a new goal or mindset? These story pieces exist in narratives across all genres and formats. Whether it's the ultimate fight for freedom in a galaxy far, far away, or a forbidden bond between two lovers in 13th century Italy. When you pack these ingredients up with your unique voice, perspective, and tone, you'll have a great chance of engaging your audience from beginning to end. But while there are common traits across most stories, there's also variations in how writers get there. So here are the 10 most prolific story structures that have been used to build the most iconic and popular stories ever told. Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. First, we start with the granddaddy of them all. The hero's journey is a pioneer of story theory. From Star Wars to Harry Potter, some of the most successful writers have used this model as a 17-step guide to cracking a magic code for all narratives. These 17 steps can be broken into 3 distinct areas: departure, initiation, and the return. The call to adventure. An event happens that pulls our ordinary hero from their comfort zone and into adventure. Frodo, from the Shire, is given a mysterious ring.
It's quite cool.
The refusal of the call. The protagonist turns down the call to action.
I'm giving it to you!
Don't tempt me, Frodo.
Supernatural aid. The hero eventually embarks on their quest, receiving aid in the form of allies, information, or tools. Crossing the first threshold. The familiar is left behind and the unknown lies ahead. Luke Skywalker leaves home to help the Rebel Alliance. Belly of the whale. Obstacles block our hero's path, forcing tough decisions and choices along the way. The road of trials. The protagonist must face 3 tests, and they will not succeed at all of them. The meeting with the goddess. Our hero meets a figure who will guide them further. Frodo encounters the High Elf Galadriel. Woman as a temptress. Another obstacle emerges. This time it is temptation. Should the protagonist take the easy way out? Atonement with the Father. Something inside our hero prevents their success. They must overcome this before they continue.
Can't believe he's gone.
Apotheosis. As the old skin is shed, a new one emerges. The protagonist is now ready for their biggest challenge. The ultimate boon. With lessons learned, the protagonist reaches their toughest test yet. can Luke and the rebels destroy the formidable Death Star?
That's no moon.
Refusal of the return. The protagonist is not the same person they were from the beginning. They have been transformed. The magic flight. Our hero takes the journey home, changed forever by their experience. Rescue from without. But the protagonist still needs assistance in their final escape. The crossing of the return threshold. The hero comes back home. With the ring destroyed, Frodo returns to the Shire. Master of two worlds. Through their trials, the protagonist now exists in the old world, but transformed. Once a timid farm boy, Luke is now a Jedi with a purpose and power. Freedom to live. Through death and rebirth, there is a new status quo. When should you use the hero's journey? This is a real trailblazer for the story structure models yet to come. With labels such as The Belly of the Whale or Meeting the Goddess, see if your tale can hang with the epic stories of the past. Christopher Vogler's The Writer's Journey. In 1992, screenwriter and Hollywood development executive Christopher Vogler converted the hero's journey from a theory into a guide. And for the past few decades, writers have adopted this as the new go-to story structure, embracing its clean layout and logical steps. The core story structure ingredients include the ordinary world, the protagonist in their everyday life. Moana lives on an island and is told to stay away from the water. The call to adventure, the initiating event of the story. Moana is chosen by the ocean to set sail across the sea to save the world. Refusal of the call. Hesitancy strikes. Our hero might not answer the call. Meeting with the mentor. The hero receives guidance before their journey begins. Or if your name is Scrooge, you might meet a ghost.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits!
Haunted? I've already had enough of that.
Crossing the first threshold. The protagonist commits to their quest, leaving their old world behind. Neo takes the red pill in the Matrix. Tests, allies, and enemies. Our heroes enter the unknown, facing trials and antagonists as well as gaining new allies. As Save the Cat would call it, fun and games. Approach to the innermost cave. The goal is in sight for our heroes. The ordeal, but the toughest challenge has blocked the hero's path. Can Simba defeat Scar to take back the throne? Reward. The protagonist has retrieved the item they were seeking or gained wisdom they were lacking. Harry Potter secures the Philosopher's Stone. The road back. Homeward bound, the hero travels back to their original world, but one last test still lies ahead. The resurrection. The protagonist needs to pass one last test, and they can take all they've learned to pass it. Return with the elixir. The protagonist returns home, transformed and with something new. This can be an intimate moment too, like Elizabeth marrying Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. When should you use the writer's journey? The new king of story structure. Since many successful writers have used this updated model to build their stories, why don't we walk your hero along this trial and see if you like the destination? Dan Harmon's Story Circle. There is one more version of Campbell's famed monomyth. This comes from Rick and Morty creator Dan Harmon. While looking for a quicker way to produce his stories, Dan Harmon developed an 8-step model that has become the staple for a new generation of storytellers across the world. The core story structure ingredients are: you establish the protagonist. We see the character in their comfort zone. Need, but something isn't right. They need something. Go, so they cross the threshold in order to find it. They enter an unfamiliar environment or situation. Search, they go on a road of trials and begin to adapt and adjust to their new world. Find, until they finally get what they wanted. Take, however, they paid a price for this goal. Return, and then they bring it home to their old familiar world. Change, now a master of both worlds, having been changed by the journey they took. When should you use Harmon's Story Circle? Like a crib sheet for story structure, you can use the Story Circle as a super quick guide for your narrative. If your character has strayed from their goal, run them through this model and put them back on the right path. The 3-act structure. Building on the 3 stages of the hero's journey, the 3-act structure strips away the lore and myths and puts your focus on framing the beginning, middle, and end. Over the years, this model has basically become a mandatory part of screenwriting. Still, authors and writers from all other formats have learned a ton of valuable lessons from the 3-act structure. And the core story ingredients are: Act 1, the setup, introductions, the protagonist, their world, their goals. The inciting incident, the specific moment that launches the protagonist on their journey. The first plot point, the first obstacle emerges for your protagonist. Now the story really kicks into gear. Act 2, the confrontation, ascending action, escalating conflict. the protagonist is thrust into a new situation they must overcome. Antagonizing forces threaten their mission while new alliances are formed. The midpoint, a specific incident jeopardizes the protagonist's goal. The second plot point, the protagonist is challenged and fails. There's a crisis of fate. Can they come back from this defeat? Act 3, the resolution. Descending action. After the crisis, will the protagonist overcome the seemingly impossible? The final climax, the ultimate test, the largest obstacle. Will the protagonist succeed at last? The outcome. All story threads come together for the conclusion. The results of the climax are revealed and the protagonist sees the world in a different light. When should you use the 3-act structure? A favorite for writers and audiences alike. If you're looking to build a punchy, familiar narrative with a clean, concise beginning, middle, and end, then this story model should work for you. Great for genre work. The 7-point story structure. Developed by author Dan Wells, the 7-point story structure suggests that writers should start at the end and build backwards, putting a focus on the outcome rather than the beginning. The core story structure ingredients are hook, the hero's starting point. It should be the polar opposite of the resolution. Plot point 1, the inciting incident that launches the story. Hinge point 1, conflict bubbles as the hero faces even more challenges and obstacles. Midpoint, the hero reacts, battling against the antagonist or the opposing forces. Pinch point 2, setbacks and pitfalls. The hero faces their toughest challenge yet, and they may not make it out unless they can adapt and learn. Plot point 2, at their final moment when everything is at stake, the hero digs deep, taking what they've learned to find a new final resolution to their journey. Resolution, the hero's quest is finished, and they are now in stark contrast with who they were at the hook. The transformation is complete. Remember, this is your starting point for story development. When should you use the 7-point story structure? It's actually quite a clever idea to begin with the ending, as all your story decisions will lead to this final moment. Does Rocky beat Apollo Creed? Can Paul Sheldon escape his #1 fan in Misery? If you know the end result, then why not make this the starting point for writing your story? Dean Coons' classic story structure outline, A Panther's Paradise. From iconic suspense author Dean Coons, here's a rough outline of what each story should contain without overloading you with prescribed formula. Number 1, introduce your protagonist and immediately plunge them into trouble. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. Coons' principle here is simple. Keep your reader's attention span in mind as you write. Don't kill your story with too much setup. Number 2, your protagonist should try to solve their problem only to slide deeper into trouble. Tension builds and action rises as your protagonist faces more difficulties as they pursue their objective.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Number 3, the situation appears hopeless. The protagonist must be brought to the very brink. Seemingly all roads lead to failure and hope is nearly lost. Only then does an answer emerge.
Milk was a bad choice.
Number 4, the protagonist faces off against the antagonist for one final time. They succeed or they fail. Your hero uses their experience against the antagonizing forces to either win, lose, or end up somewhere in the middle. Either way, this is the end of your character's story. When should you use the Dean Coons classic story structure? If you want less structure in your story, then the Dean has you covered. Keep your story on track without mapping too much navigation along the way. Save the cat. If Dean Coons' story model was for the pantsers, then Blake Snyder's Save the Cat is definitely for the plotters. Providing detailed story points based on the specific pages of a 110-page screenplay, many writers have turned to Save the Cat when they wanted to follow very strict guidelines for their story. The core story structure ingredients are opening image, the very first moment of your story. This sets the tone for the rest of the narrative. It should also act as a rhyme to the final image. The setup, setting the status quo of the world and the protagonist, their wants, their needs, their desires. Theme stated. Stories usually have themes, and this is a time in our story where you want to indicate what your story is truly about.
The end is inevitable, Maverick. Your kind is headed for extinction.
Maybe so, sir. But not today.
Catalyst, or the inciting incident in 3-act structure terminology. Debate, the protagonist hesitates. In a moment of weakness, they refuse the call of action.
Papa says my real father lives in a magical place far away. I don't know what to do.
Break into 2. The protagonist finally makes a choice. Their story begins. B story, the introduction of a second story arc, which underscores the main narrative while reflecting on the theme as well.
Best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear.
Thanks, but I don't sing.
Fun and games. This is where the magic happens. The new world is explored, character connections are developed, and powers are tested. Midpoint. The fun and games must come to an end with a plot twist. The journey changes, the stakes are raised, and real consequences emerge. Bad guys close in. The conflict and challenges heighten as the protagonist falters and begins to fail. All is lost. Rock bottom for our hero. The dark night of the soul. Hope is a candle flickering in its last light. Is this the end?
I need your help.
Break into 3. The hero receives something in the nick of time. Maybe there is hope.
They're flowers. The flowers are making the predators go savage. That's it! That's what I've been missing!
Finale. The final face-off. Protagonist versus antagonist. Using their newly gained knowledge, the protagonist takes one last shot at success. Final image. Bringing it all back. This end moment shows how the hero has changed and works as a mirrored reflection of the opening image, bringing everything together in full circle. When should you use Save the Cat? A great starting point for newbie writers and authors who want quick results in the early stages of their idea. If you're looking for a strict narrative mentorship, then Save the Cat may just save your story. In Medius Res. Hook them from the start. That's the idea behind In Medius Res. If the 7-point story structure wants you to think of the ending first, In Medius Res wants you to grab the reader from page 1 with a dynamic opening. Setup and backstory have no place at the start. For this model, the establishing points need to be figured out later, once the audience have been pulled in. The core story structure ingredients are rising action, open in the middle, something compelling, shocking even, that will grip your reader to continue. Explanation or backstory. But now it's time to plan out how you'll get your audience up to speed with the characters, the setting, and the plot.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Make the opening critical. Weave the opening into your plot so that it becomes a vital story element that will be instrumental in the resolution. Build upon the curiosity of the opening scene. The opening should be both gripping and curious. Raise questions that the reader will want answered throughout the story. When should you use In Medius Res? Do you want your audience to leap from their seat from the get-go? If so, pack a wallop from the top and give them something truly impactful. Just be sure to keep an eye out for exposition hazards later in the story, as you have to make up for lost context later.
Report back to me when, I don't know, when it makes sense.
Poetics, where it all began. For this story structure, we're reaching all the way back to the fine year of 335 BC, where Aristotle developed what could possibly be the very first story theory. While this is an early story concept, you'll find that many of these elements are still used in modern storytelling today. But let's see how Aristotle did it. The core story structure ingredients are mythos or plot. Your plot should follow a probable sequence of events, and the protagonist should go from happiness to misery. Character. The hero must be looked upon favorably, but their misery should come as an error on their own part. Thought. This is the theme of the drama. Why are you telling the story? This is where the central thought should lie. Diction. What is the language and how the story is presented? Aristotle says that a balance must be struck between the poetic and the prosaic speech, meaning it should be artistic but not confusing. Melody. This refers to the music of the drama, how it flows and plays out. Spectacle. What does your story look like? The settings, the costume, and the world that has been created. The more engrossed in the spectacle, the more engaged the reader will be. When should you use poetics? Back to basics. It doesn't hurt to dig into the roots of storytelling to check some of the fundamental boxes on the whys and hows of your narrative. Does your storyline contain these ingredients? The Snowflake Method. The Snowflake Method puts the core of your story in focus and then builds out from the center. You may start out with a snowflake of an idea, but soon you'll end up with an avalanche, the first draft of your story. The core story structure ingredients are the sentence. Sum up your story in a sentence. The paragraph. Then make it a paragraph. Bring in your characters, your settings, your main conflicts, and your resolution. The one-page summary. Now flesh all of this out into one full page, detailing the story from the perspective of your main character. The 4-pager. Evolve your story further, develop each character, their motivation, and the central plot points into a 4-page document. The character chart. Next, it's time to create character sheets based on your core main cast. with full descriptions, personalities, details, backstory, and motivation. The scene breakdown. Using your 4-pager as a guide, break down the entire story into individual scenes. The scene descriptions. Take these scenes and develop them further, expanding each one into a 3 to 4 paragraph description. The first draft. The last layer of your snowflake. It's time to write your first draft. When should you use the Snowflake method? A great way of taking the smallest nugget of an idea and snowballing it into something larger. From first flake to first draft, try this out if you're in the mood for experimenting with a different approach to story building. And there you have it, the 10 most prolific story structure models that successful writers embrace. What do you think? Is there one here that you've used before, or maybe one that you absolutely love? If so, let's hear it. Drop your favorite model in the comments and let's see which one is the most popular. Thank you so much for watching. Now that we've tackled story structure, let's make sure you can properly synopsize your story in a short, snappy way. Click here and together we'll create a captivating logline for your story in just 3 minutes. My name is Chris Brennan and I will see you in the next chop.